admissions counselor here at Providence College. I'm based on campus, so I currently live in Providence, Rhode Island, but I am originally from Eastern Pennsylvania. Also, I've spent some time in the DC area and Albany, New York, so been bopping around a little bit.
Hi, everybody. My name is Megan O'Rourke. I'm the Associate Dean for Midwest Recruitment, which is a very long title for what it means. I am based in the Chicago area. I work with all of the Midwest. So if we have any Midwesterners joining this evening, welcome. We're in the central time zone hanging out. I have been working for PC for a handful of years, but my entire admission experience has been at private schools. I'm a journalism major by trade, so love talking about the essay. Sarah is here. We're gonna break it all down for you tonight so that you all feel better, more confident, less stressed, less anxious, ready to rock and roll. And am I missing anything? I think we're good, right? Okay.
Nailing it.
Awesome. So as we go, like I said, if you've got questions, pop them in the Q&A and we will do our best to make sure that we are answering those as we go along. If by chance we miss something or you feel like there's something else you want to know and maybe want to connect with us privately, our emails are going to be at the end of the slide show that we will walk you through. Okay, so let's get started. We've got a few slides to walk you through. A lot of this, though, we want you to feel like this is a conversation. I know that we can't hear you or see you, but we want this to feel like a conversation in that our hope is that by giving you some additional information about the part that people often stress out about the most, that you have a better understanding of the role that it plays in the application review process and how you can take some time and be thoughtful with the words that you are putting on the page, so to speak, as you think about the topic that you're going to choose, or maybe you've already started that process. So let's get started. These are our email addresses. So if you want to take a quick snapshot of that, you can reach us directly. Even if we are not your respective admission counselors, we are happy to help, or we are happy to get you in touch with your admission counselor on our campus. That's the thing. Sarah mentioned some of the areas where she's lived, where she recruits. I've got the Midwest. So between the two of us, we only cover one sliver of all of the students that we serve at PC. And so we are happy to get you connected with your respective person because we're about to go on the road. Sarah, when do you start traveling to your territory?
I start the second week of September, which felt really far away until it suddenly was August late last week. And now it feels like it's right around the corner. So I'm thrilled to hit the road again.
And I feel like there's probably many people sitting in the Zoom tonight thinking it's already the first week of August. How are we here already? So let's talk a little bit about the essay, just kind of generally speaking. If you want to move to that first slide, we'll get things kicked off in terms of what the purpose of it is, because I often get questions, and Sarah, I'm sure you do too, of like, okay, so what is the role that it plays, or where does it function in like the list of importance when it comes to what I'm submitting to college, and how can I understand like what things I need to include to make sure that I like live up to that, right? I have been working in college admissions for 18 years, 17 years. And one of the things that I always try to encourage students to think about is really writing something that's in your own voice that really gives us that unique and specific perspective of who you are. It should be a way for us to learn as the application reader, as your admission counselor. It should give us another understanding of an additional component to who you are, what makes up you. And it's different from the other things that we can see within the application, right? We get your transcripts, we can see what classes you're taking. We learn more about your parents and your family life. We get to see what you're doing outside of class through your activity list. But this is like you in your own words. So this is your chance to share kind of more about your identity and your background as we kind of think about the other things and how they kind of all interplay. Sarah, I don't know if there's something that's maybe stuck out to you as you think about the essay as part of the
Yeah.
overall application?
I would say I always think about it from the perspective of like, this is really one of the only places on the entire application that you're fully in the driver's seat. You get to decide exactly what you want to talk about and how you want to say it. A lot of the other parts of the application, for better or worse, you are a rising junior or a rising senior, like your transcript exists, your grades exist, your letters of recommendation will say what they're going to say about you. And you obviously have spent time doing well in school and forming great relationships with your professors and your teachers in high school. But at the end of the day, the essay is where it's 100% you. And so I think just understanding that piece of it too, of you get to do really whatever you want.
I love that. I think that's such a good point too, because there's so much quantitative information that goes into the application. This really becomes the qualitative component. And, the English part of this, right? The grammatical, the spelling, all of the things related to like, yes, this is an English exercise, if you think about it philosophically. So spelling and grammar matter. Obviously, you don't want to write your essay how you text someone using more formal language than that. But like on the flip side of that, I also don't need it to like look and feel like an English, or excuse me, like an English paper. Yeah. I was just at a workshop at a high school here in the Chicagoland area. And one of the students had written this essay for his English class junior year. And he was like, I think I like this, but I'm not sure. What do you think of the topic? And it was a good topic, but it was so formal that you kind of lose the personality of it. And I think for us, our hope is that your authentic self can shine through. So you can be funny. If you're kind of quirky, you can be quirky. If you feel nostalgic or sentimental about something and you want to share that, great. The authenticity is so important when it comes to feeling like we get to know you. Sarah, you work with such a big territory and you see a lot of students in the visits that you have and the college fairs that you attend. Realistically, you're not going to meet every kid that applies from your territory, right?
No, and realistically too, like we love meeting students on the road. We love talking to you. But sometimes those names disappear a little bit in our memory, right? And maybe you'll pop up on an email or a visit later and we get to
Mhm.
have that connection. But at the end of the day, we don't remember everybody that we're reading an application for because we didn't necessarily meet everybody or it was a quick meeting. And this is the place where we really get to meet you kind of officially again.
One quick word of advice, and you can see this at the bottom, and we'll talk about this kind of towards the end, but the word count is also like a factor here, in my opinion, in that the common application, which is how you apply to Providence College, it's how you apply to, I think it's over 1,000 schools across the country will accept it. So there are plenty of places that accept this application. Their essay count, the minimum is 250 words and the maximum is 650 words. 250, 300 words feels like a glorified paragraph.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for us, Sarah, I usually tell students try to aim for like 500, that like minimum. What would you
Yeah,
say to that?
I would say 500 is a good goal too, because it gives you that flexibility above and beyond. I would say when students are writing and they are struggling to even hit that minimum, that 250, it's a great indicator that you've chosen the wrong topic. And we're going to chat about topics in a little bit. But in theory, these essays are things that you care about. It's things you're involved in, important parts of yourself you're sharing with us. And if you're writing authentically, hitting 500 words and staying below 650 words is going to be the challenge. So staying in that like 500 to 650 is really the sweet spot.
Yes, I totally agree. And some of you might be writing some stuff where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm at 800 and how do I cut? We're going to give you some advice about that. Because I think there are ways to like cut it down to a place where you get to around 650. But keep in mind that it does cut you off after 650. So that is something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Now, this is just like general advice, but I think we often then, in talking to students, at this workshop today, it's like, okay, so this is all helpful advice, but like, what about the structure of it? And so I usually use and I'm sure your English teachers, you maybe have heard this from English teachers, this idea of into, through, and beyond. So if Sarah, if you want to move to the next slide.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I encourage students to think about is the concept of like, you're telling us a story, you're telling us more about who you are. And in many of the Common App questions, which we will show you on the screen, I'm sure many of you on here have like already looked at these because Common App is now open. There's like three parts to the question. So it's one question, but it has three things that you have to answer. And oftentimes what we see is we get so much background, which is the into, like, okay, get me into the story, that we lose the sense of like the other two parts, which is oftentimes the most important or can be the most compelling part of an essay. But a good essay is able to kind of draw somebody in. We get you through the story, and then, okay, so what? So what of all of the things that you could tell me? Why did you tell me this thing? And that's the beyond, right? That's the stuff that's happening at the end, after, in the future, right? Now, Sarah, I'm sure you've talked to students recently, especially because this is like prime essay writing time, about how to like start a draft. Like, what's your advice for students as they think about either editing a draft or starting a draft or brainstorming? Like, what are some things that you tell students that can help them get started?
Yeah, I would say I feel like it's really easy to get lost in the weeds, and to think that the first thing that you create has to be really strong. And in reality, it shouldn't be. So there's no shame in just throwing ideas onto a piece of paper, and you don't have to flesh them out. You can just sort of brainstorm it on your own. I think sometimes there's this idea that you're going to like sit down and you're going to write your college essay. And that is just not that is just not for most people realistic. It is going to be a process. And so being comfortable with that and knowing that your first few attempts might not hit on what you're hoping to hit on is perfectly okay, because as you kind of have those false starts and those moments, you're gonna get closer to figuring out what it is you're actually trying to talk about. And we never see any of those thrown out drafts. Nobody will ever know they existed. We're just going to see the final product. But don't let the stress of that final product impact you at the beginning of the process. I think this is like a great example of like, there are no wrong answers. Like when you start this process, there are no wrong topics, there are no wrong answers. Just get things on paper and kind of see what resonates with you.
I love that, because I feel like it's easy to get like 6 steps ahead of like,
Mhm.
oh, I need to do this, or it needs to answer this question. And it's like the first draft, don't pay attention to the like spelling and grammar. Don't pay attention to structure or format. Like literally just write. So maybe you're a pen and paper person, maybe you're a computer typing person, maybe you're like on your iPad, however you're going to do this, great. But like set the timer for 10 minutes and like think about a story and just start writing, or think about this experience that you've had or whatever and just start writing. The good first opening sentence, that's not going to come right away. The really awesome solid closing, also to Sarah's point, not going to come right away. Like the writing should just be the writing, like let it flow. It's the second, the third, maybe even the fourth time that you go back to it that you can start making these adjustments and getting that really strong opening sentence and that really, really solid conclusion. We did have a question about the into, through, and beyond. And I think I'm going to get to your question, but I think it's better to show you how this comes about in one of the Common App essay questions, because there's a couple of these questions that really like highlight how this works, or the framework or structure of how you might answer a question in this way. Okay. So let's talk about then how you might find a way to find the right topic, being able to answer these different components, being able to like find something that resonates with you or is meaningful to you. If you want to pop that next slide up, because this is the thing that I think we get asked a lot, both with students we meet in their schools, when they come to campus, when we do these workshops, like what's the right topic for me to write about? And Sarah, what is your answer when someone asks you that question?
I think my answer is we want to read an essay that was written by you, you as an individual and a unique human being. And I think when we put these common topics up, we're not saying don't write about them, because you may have a unique spin on any of these things that are up here. But I think you like spending the time and thinking through what makes your topic different than somebody else's. And so I know like it's sometimes a joke in the office, like the Achilles heel, like tearing, before the big game, all these athletic ones. And the reason it's a bit of a joke sometimes is not because they're not important, crucial things that happen to a student. It's not because they're not great essay topics. It's because when we think back to that into, the through, and the beyond, these essays, when people choose these topics, are some of the most in danger of kind of staying in that into phase, where you guys are going to give us a lot of the context. You're going to lay the scene for the game. You're going to tell us all these details about the score and the injury. But then that beyond piece always seems to be just a little bit too small in these topics. And so I would say that's kind of one thing that I always recommend keeping in mind when you're choosing a topic is that we want the why. We want the unique piece that's just you. And the narrative part, the story part, needs to kind of be a secondary part of that. And I feel like it's organically, a lot of students want to put it first. And that's kind of the first pitfall that people kind of run into.
That is like spot on advice, because I often think that the thing that happened to them, like a sports injury, for example, like an ACL tear, that impacts so much of a student's day-to-day existence that it's like, oh yeah, of course I'm going to talk about this thing. But we see a lot of these kinds of essays. And so what is a way that you might write about this kind of sports injury that's maybe a little different from someone else, or it's more unique to the experiences that you've had? I was working with a student today at this workshop who's a hockey player, and they were playing hockey, and the blade, is that what you call the bottom of a skate? Okay, we're going to go with that. Sliced this student's Achilles tendon.
Oof.
Right? And I was like, outside of leaving all of the gore of what happened aside, obviously, it took a very, very long time for him to recuperate and like physically be able to manage existing in a high school space. Obviously, that like is a big deal, right? It's not your typical sports injury. And so we talked a lot about, okay, in this example, what is a way that you might share what you've learned in a way that feels different or unique than other students who have had sports injuries? And so he was like reflecting on some of the things he like went through a period of just like mental health issues, right? Like struggling to understand, if I'm not an athlete, who am I? And having to find other outlets at school that provided him, a similar level of like fulfillment, I guess is maybe the right word here. And I think he did a really nice job of like, oh, I can reflect, like spending some time to reflect on that. He didn't automatically do. It wasn't really in that first draft. But then going back and like thinking about it, yeah, there were things that impacted him. So like that's the part that we often lose. And I think if you can focus on one specific part, so instead of like a floodlight, think of it like a spotlight, one specific thing from the service trip that really stuck out to you, that meant a lot to you. What is that thing? And how can you write about it in a way that's authentic to your story? My piece of advice for this is like, if you feel like you could erase your name and put your friend's name or your teammate's name, is not the right topic to write about. So
I would also throw in an apologies to any parents or counselors that might be floating around this call. it is wonderful to get advice from people who know you best, but at the end of the day, if you don't choose a topic that you care about, it will come through in the final product. And so, your first brainstorming sessions about your topic, those don't have to be shared. Just think it through on your own. Don't feel like you need to tell mom or dad. Don't feel like you need to tell your counselor initially either. Like, this can be something where you're just workshopping ideas. Because when other people have feedback, you aren't quite sure what you want to write about yet, it can sometimes really bleed into your topic, and you end up with an essay that is what mom thinks you should write about, and maybe a little bit further away from what you wanted to write about it. And so we'll talk about bringing in, family and friends and editing on a future slide. But I think as it relates to topics, just being cognizant that there is a time and a place for feedback. And I think sometimes choosing the topic is not always the best place to bring in that feedback, at least in the early brainstorming stages.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Now we've got a question that I'm wondering what you think about this. Would an essay about like a unique hobby or extracurricular activity be a good topic to write about?
That is a good question. I feel like yes, provided you can kind of relate it to a bigger picture. So, one of the things that colleges, Providence included, are looking for in your application is how you're going to fit into our community and our campus life. And if you are like the world's best accordion player, like absolutely we want to know that. But I've never read for clarity's sake, I've never read an accordion essay, but
Hey, if
it
there's
was the
any
first thing that
accordion
came to mind.
players in the room, here we go. This is your moment.
Yes, again, absolutely. We want to hear about some of those unique components that make kind of you an interesting and different applicant. But you just want to make sure that you're kind of steering away from it being a narrative. Again, we still want to get to an importance, a why, a conclusion. And so, yes, write about your hobbies, but definitely tie it into kind of a bigger picture component too.
I love that. Okay. That I would also agree. I think it's not a bad idea to do. Like, I think it's the execution of it is what's going to matter here. But I've seen plenty of examples of this. And I have a friend and colleague who works at another school who read an essay this past year about a student and their talent as a yo-yoer. Is that how we would say that? And so there was like a yo-yo championship that this student went to and like wrote this whole essay about yo-yoing. And I thought that was like fascinating because that is another topic I've never seen before. But I think, again, to go back to what Sarah just said, making sure the focus is on you, that there's a point and a reason that we're getting this information, right? So let's talk then about the questions themselves, because I want to get back to that question about like the into, through, and beyond. And I see your question about the supplemental essay, and that's a good one. We're going to get to that for sure. So we're not going to read these verbatim to you, but these are the first four, and then we can show you the next three. And yep, there we go. Those are the next three. So of the seven, just to give you a little bit of background, Common App usually shares which ones get written about the most. And Sarah, do you know which ones they are? Because I just got this data and I'm like so intrigued by it. If you had to guess.
If I had to guess, I would probably say it's number 7, the kind of choose your own adventure topic. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was something else.
So 1, 2, and 7 are the 3 most written about, with number 1 eking out 2 and 7 as like the one that's written about the most. I'm sure that this is twofold. You read the first one, you're like, this looks good, I'm going to write about it. I also think it's not complicated in the way that a couple of these other ones are. And they're not like hard complicated, but as we mentioned, they have multiple parts. So I want to get back to the question of into, through, and beyond. Let's look at number 2 together. I will read this one. The lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you, and what did you learn? So for the person that asked about into, through, and beyond, the recounting a time, that's your into. You're setting the story up with the background the reader needs to know to feel like they understand the purpose of the storytelling. Okay. The through is how did it impact you? So in that moment, we're in the middle of it, right? Like the through becomes how did it affect you? And then the beyond, so the future, the result. What did you learn? Now, Sarah referenced this, but I want to give you actual percentages here. You know, she mentioned that we often get essays that spend so much time with recount a time, like the recounting becomes so much of the essay that it's like, what did you learn? Is like 2 sentences at the end. That is not what we are looking for. The goal here is recounting the storytelling of like what happened. That should only be about a third of your essay. And then the other 2/3 can be how did it affect you and what did you learn? If you wanted to assign like mathematical proportions to this. Ultimately, the most important part of a question like this is what did you learn? And I think for some students, it sometimes isn't a good idea to talk about something you are currently experiencing because the ability to reflect on it can get tricky. That's not to say that's the answer all of the time, but I was at a workshop about a month or so ago, and a student that I was working with, her dog had just died. It was a very sad essay. She was clearly like grief stricken, like in the middle of grief about this family dog that she had never, like her memories that as far back as she can remember, the dog was there, right? So like the dog had been with the family a long time. And so we talked a lot about how that was just too fresh and too new to have any perspective because essentially the essay became about the dog. And I think for a lot of students, the easiest way to think about this is like, is it a scar or is it a wound? If it's a wound, you're in the middle of it. It is still healing. It's still in the process of healing. Whereas a scar, there's perspective on it, right? It is clearly healed over and you are okay to be able to talk about that thing. So I would say that in questions like, number 2, number 3, even if it's a tricky thing that you're dealing with or emotional and you don't feel like you have the perspective, that's okay. Maybe there's something else to write about. So keep that in the back of your mind as you're like sorting through these topics. I don't know of the 4 that are on the screen, if anything jumps out at you as like something you want to comment on, Sarah.
I think that I would just say, and we might talk on this, like touch on this later when we have kind of our tips and tricks slide. But when we think about that word limit and like the struggle sometimes that students have in staying within it, 99% of the time there's too much in your into part. And so I've read phenomenal essays that have started me just in the middle of the action. Like the thing they're talking about has already happened and it's all the through and beyond. And so, yes, I think the 30% is like a great rule of thumb, but I also think that there are no hard and fast rules in
Agreed.
in these
That's fair.
essays. And
That's
so
really fair.
things might make sense for your particular topic. But yes, I would hesitate to go above a third.
Yeah. Yeah. And these are, yeah, good. That's such a great point. Like, cause I feel like people hear what we say and they get like, okay, I have to follow that rule. And you don't. This is just advice that we're giving in all of the years that we've worked in admission and things that we have seen. I will say this, number 4 is the newest of all of the 7 questions. It's the one that's written about the least and the one that intrigues me the most, because I love the idea of gratitude. All too often, I think, just generally speaking, we are grateful for things and we are grateful for people in our lives and experiences we have, but we don't know how to articulate those things to those people, right? Or think about how to be grateful or how to manifest that in our regular lives. And I think this is like kind of a fun and interesting one that if you've got an idea, this would be a good one. I maybe only read 1 or 2 of those this year.
I was gonna say, I think I saw maybe one. It was, was not a common one. That being said, I think I do want to highlight too. I think sometimes when you're looking at these prompts on the Common App, it feels like a really big decision. And I'm gonna be honest with you, and Megan, maybe you feel differently, but 99% of the time, I don't even notice what prompt students have chosen. I just go straight into the essay. And so, at the end of the day, write what you want to write about. And if you do choose one of these prompts, do be sure to answer all the parts of it. But
Mhm.
know that like we're not sitting there being like, oh, they wrote the gratitude prompt. Like, I'm gonna hate this essay. Like in reality, like we're not paying much attention at all to what prompt you selected. We're really only looking at the essay and the quality of the essay.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answers here. Like, oh, I should pick 2 versus 6. And it's like, that's not a thing. Pick whichever one resonates with you, but also know that, like, realistically, what you want to write about probably fits into more than one of these topics. If bare minimum, if you're writing about something, it at least is going to fit into 7. It likely then fits into 1 and then could fit into one of these other ones. The one on this, so like of the 7, 6 is the one that I find interesting because we again don't see this one very often. But I think it's kind of a fun way if you, for the person that wrote or had the question about the hobby, maybe you write about 6. Like you could write the hobby question about 7 or 1 for sure, but 6 also works here, right? Like the questions, while they are specific, still have an open-ended aspect to them that allows you to be pretty free flowing with the information that you share, and it probably covers multiple topics. So let's see, oh, that's the supplemental essay. Okay, cool. So hopefully that helps in like looking at these topics to kind of figure out maybe one of them is like, ooh, that one sounds cool, or oh, I'm going to try writing. Here's another piece of advice about brainstorming and or writing a rough draft. I also, to Sarah's point, like wouldn't pick one to write about, just like start writing and then you can figure out which one it goes to. However, if you are someone that needs more structure than that, I think it's okay to pick one of these things and write, because for some people that activates something in their brain that becomes easier to be able to do. I don't know if you have, okay, great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think my kind of final point on topic selection, and I don't want to like date myself, but like TikTok was not a thing, Instagram not really a thing when I was going through this process. But now that I work in admissions, like let me tell you, my like feeds are covered in admission stuff every fall. And I know that there's always, posts and things about students like my college essay that got me into Harvard.
Mm.
And you're going to see a lot of content online. And just know that those are not indicative of the vast majority of college essays that are being written, nor should you be trying to strive for some of those types. I mean, they're often very interesting and creative, and phenomenal essays. But at the end of the day, it's TikTok showing you random stuff. And so my last my last point would be try to distance yourself from that sort of social media as it relates to college admissions, because I think it can make you second guess yourself and worry in ways that are not valid. Like really unfair to be comparing yourself to
Oh,
possibly fake essays on TikTok or Instagram.
yes. Comparison is the thief of joy, and social media amplifies the ability to compare ourselves to other people so easily. We don't know anything about them, their journey, their background, their experiences. So don't do that. Like, you have a great essay in you. I know that. It's just a matter of taking the time to be thoughtful to do it. And I don't want you to like overthink this either, right? Like there is something that you can share with us. I often get like, well, nothing bad's ever happened to me. It's like, you don't have to write about something bad or sad or traumatic. You can, but that is not the way that you're like, oh gosh, they wrote a sad essay, they're getting into college. Like that's not how it works. I hopefully am dispelling that myth for all of you and your friends. Share that information with them. The key here, as we've already said, is being authentic to your experiences in the 17 or 18 years you've been alive. So we had this really great question, Sarah, about supplemental essays. So let's talk about that, because I think for Providence specifically, because we've talked a lot about general information about the essay and the process and all of the things. But for us, for our application process, and for many schools like ours, and even like, big public schools might have something like a supplemental essay. So like, how does that play a part specifically at Providence in our review process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something I know I hear all the time, all summer, all fall. And I'm going to take a moment to talk about the word optional because I know you guys are seeing it on a lot of different things and like it can mean a lot of different things. And we are guilty of this at Providence too. So the two big places you're going to see optional in our process are standardized test scores and the supplemental essay. And they do not mean the same thing. And we're sorry about that. The English language is limited. Um, for things like the SAT and the ACT, we are truly optional. If you don't submit it, it will never negatively impact your application. And if you do submit it, it is often less important than other pieces that we are looking at. The vast majority of our applicants do not submit SAT or ACT scores. So
And that,
that's one
yeah.
definition of
Mhm.
optional. And now we're going to move to the optional supplemental essay. This is one of those things where it is optional. We read and admit students who don't write the supplement. Absolutely. Not 100% of our incoming classes next year wrote the supplement for sure. That being said, it is a way that we can discern your interest. We can see the additional effort you've taken. It's the one place on the application you get to write about Providence College specifically. And so it gives us a chance to hear a little bit more about you and your interests specifically in Providence College. And so I'm going to be honest, I love when students write the supplement. I always tell my students to write the supplement. Um, but it is optional and you guys are busy. Your lives are busy. You're involved in a ton of different things. And as you can see up on the screen, like every college has supplemental essays and it can spiral out of control for sure. But definitely take the time to write those supplements for the schools that you are most invested in, because it will be something that does factor into our evaluation.
So this is my philosophy on this. And I had a colleague and friend who used to work at the University of Chicago. So you can see that question listed there first. And this was her advice to students was, and I loved this. It's not supplemental essays or short answer questions for colleges that are, in addition to the main essay, right? So it's just, we're just talking about this component of the application is not why you want to go to college because you're doing that, you're doing that through the other parts of your application. It's why do you want to go to my college, even if the school is not asking that directly. So in terms of supplemental essays, a lot of schools have them as optional. A lot of schools say we need them, and there's plenty of other schools that say we don't have anything like this. You just submit the application as it is. I think it's always good to connect with your admission counselor if you have questions about this. For Providence College specifically, Sarah and I are happy to speak on behalf of our staff and say, we would really encourage you. This is your insider info. You're here with us. So we're giving you that insider tip or trick to submit it. I think though that the questions themselves sometimes get super creative. University of Chicago is an easy one where it's like they are very unique and kind of quirky. So like, what's so easy about pie? And for somebody that maybe isn't familiar, like it's easy as pie is like a saying that people used to say, and I haven't heard anyone say it in a very long time. These are, I think, from last year or 2 years ago. So these might not be these schools' current supplemental essay questions. What's your favorite word and why? At Pomona, we celebrate and identify with the number 47. Share with us one of your quirky personal, family, or community traditions and why you hold on to it. You might also find questions, short answer questions or supplemental essay questions like, why do you want to study what you want to study? Or why do you want to go to our school? The way to answer these things is, for the UVA question, it's a little easier. Like it's a very specific question that you have, so many words to do so. But if a school is asking about your interest in a major or your interest in that school, this is your time to kind of highlight the research that you've done. If you've done a visit, sharing that information. Everybody has a little bit of a different philosophy if they do have these extra things that they want you to answer. I think a safe bet is to just do the extra thing, even though it is going to take more time. And we know you have a lot on your plate. But my hope personally is that some of this can be used, like maybe you've got a really great sentence and that can be carried from one supplemental essay to the next. I wouldn't copy and paste from school to school, because oftentimes the questions are specific to that institution. And just keep in mind that if we are asking, these supplemental essay questions, there's a reason. We want to see what you like about us. Like, it's an ego boost, right? Like, hey, what kind of research did you do? What do you know? How interested are you? It's an easy way to make that distinction between you and another student. So we would encourage you at any school, if it's optional, to just do it. But you will find with these questions, I think from your perspective as the student, or if you're a parent or family member watching, what does that school value? Like, what is important to them? Do they take themselves really seriously? Do they not? Are they super academic? Are they really committed to service? You might be able to get a little bit more insight into that school by reading and responding to these kinds of questions.
I would also highlight that for the vast majority, if not all schools, their supplement is substantially shorter than the essay that you'll be writing for the Common App. So most, like ours is like 250 to 500. Things really float around in that range. And so we're looking at maybe 2 paragraphs. You know, it's not a huge piece of writing. And so I would recommend, you know, I hope that you're just applying to Providence College, but if you're applying to a bunch of different schools, say you're applying to 20 schools, the max on the Common App, right? Those supplements are up and they're accessible on school websites. So just start writing them. Just start sort of moving through them, because they are less of a heavy lift than the actual Common App essay, but they do have weight. You know, they are being used in the admissions process. And so the more that you can write and kind of get taken care of in the summer and the early fall, the more confident you'll feel. It's also a great exercise before you head into your Common App essay.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just a great writing exercise too, getting more comfortable with your voice. And so definitely start working through these questions sooner rather than later, because they aren't, you know, they're not that long. Some of them have really short word limits, and I think you'll be surprised by how quickly they go when you start working through them.
Yeah, some of them are going to be so like 100, 150 words. So there's no creativity there, right? It's just like getting to the point as quickly as you can. So for the person that asked the question, I hope you caught that. For our supplemental essays, Sarah, let's just pull ours up at this point. We can show you our 2. Ours are 250 to 500. So in our example, or in our situation, I guess specifically, you're picking one of the 2 to write about. You do not write both. You just pick one of the 2 to write about. And for the person that asked about where does this live, it's in Common App. So once you go into the Common Application, there's sections that you will fill out that goes to every school. But then you will also add like my schools. You add your own schools where you're applying to. And when you do that, the questions then pop up for each of those institutions and what you have to answer or do for each of those respective places. And so then in that instance, when you've added Providence College to one of your My Schools or to your My Schools tab, you will see then this pops up in our section of questions. So again, not going to read them to you, but for us, our goal was to try to come up with 2 questions that would give someone an opportunity to maybe share more about their academic interests and background, maybe how they might bring a certain perspective to classes, to the community. You know, if you're thinking about student life, there's a way to incorporate that. We wanted the questions to feel specific to us, but also give you an ability to like reflect on your own experiences in high school and how those 2 things connect and might be tied together more tightly than you might realize. So for the person that asked, and thank you for your patience in us getting to your question, you asked about like overlapping, right? Like this idea that you are going to answer a Common App question, and then you also then have to answer these questions. The goal for all of you is that this answer is different than the answer and the response that we get to the Common App essay prompt. Sarah, I mean, that feels pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes I'm surprised I have to say this, but we do get apps every year that have copy and pasted like the conclusion paragraph of their Common App essay into the supplement. Don't do that. It definitely should be a different essay. Of course, sometimes there's overlapping themes. And that's fine. I've seen people use their supplement to dive a little bit more into maybe how the experience in their Common App impacted their decision to apply to Providence or their decision to choose a specific major, and kind of have drilled it down to that level. So it's still related to the essay they wrote. Maybe their essay is about a family member in poor health and their interaction with the nursing field. And then their supplement dives more into that specific nursing and caring for others and that perspective. I've seen them related, and I don't mind if they're related. If you feel like you need that space to provide more detail, that's fine, but they should be two standalone essays. I should be able to read your supplement and not have to have read your Common App, and vice versa.
That's a really good point. We have a question. So we're trying to answer questions as we go. So hopefully you all are realizing that that's totally okay to do. But one of the things that someone asked was, do you think it's beneficial to write more about like the classes and specific things that interest them about PC, or like how they might fit into the community at PC? Do you have an opinion about that?
I actually love this question. I feel like people could absolutely go either way. I would caution against doing too much like name dropping of like in Dr. So-and-so's class, intro to blah, blah, blah. Like I've definitely seen that come up in supplements where they clearly pulled up our course list, found something that interested them. You're wasting words on something that isn't necessarily directly tied to you. I don't need you to prove that you did your research to me. I know that students are doing their research and they're making informed choices. But you absolutely can use it to talk about different majors or programs you might be interested in. Or you can do the community side of things and what activities and involvements you have would fit into your life at Providence. I think both are kind of equally valid, but just making sure that you're keeping yourself at the center of it. So if you are interested in a specific major or a specific course or class, like I want to know why you specifically are interested in that. I don't want to know any information about the class. And likewise, if you're interested in doing a specific club or activity, you don't need to prove that you researched that club on our website or followed them on Instagram and know information about them. I want to know more about your specific interest and yourself.
I think it's hard for students to know like the best way to attack some of these questions. I would say for me, I'm okay with you like throwing in a few details that show me, oh, okay, they get it. They understand who we are and how we connect back to what you want to accomplish out of this next set of 4 years, right? But yeah, I think there's a point when the essay becomes more about like, look at all of the stuff I know. And it's like, yeah, cool, that's great. But how does that connect to like what you want out of this? Because it is an investment. And so our hope is that tie-in of the two things can really marry itself together. We had a question about like the term personal statement versus essay and all of that. We unfortunately use that term interchangeably with an essay. So in terms of the application itself, you've got the Common App, which is going to ask for biographical information about you and your family, where you go to high school, if you've taken any college classes, what is your senior year schedule, your activity list, and then this essay or personal statement, and then the supplemental essay. And then you submit your transcript from your high school and one letter of recommendation from a teacher or counselor. So those are the required components of the application. I hope that helps. So personal statement, yes, we mean the essay. And I know some other schools use those two terms interchangeably. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some tips and tricks for you all as we get to the end of our session. So obviously, Common App opened on August 1st. If you're looking for supplemental essays more quickly, just Google them. It's pretty easy to find because everyone should have that stuff ready to go because Common App opened on the 1st. I think we've already talked about being authentic and brainstorming activities. So if you're still like Megan and Sarah, don't know how to do the brainstorming thing or struggling to figure that out, College Essay Guy is a great resource for people looking for brainstorming activities. He's got a bunch of free stuff on his website that you can take advantage of. In terms of tips or tricks, what you kind of mentioned the editing thing earlier. Do you want to circle back to that?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to, we read thousands of essays every year written by 17-year-olds, and we very much know what a high school senior writing sounds like. And so when we say there's such a thing as too much editing, there is a point where if you have a lot of people with eyes on your essay, and amazing feedback, I'm sure, but you don't want to get to a point where your essay is their words and not your own. So absolutely, lean on your family, your counselors, your teachers for advice and feedback. But that is not an indefinite process.
Yeah,
You don't want to ask
that's a good point.
dozens of people for edits, and you also don't necessarily need to incorporate all of their edits. It is your essay, and it's your voice. And back to the authentic component, it is you that you're sharing with us. And so there is absolutely a thing as too much editing. There's a point where you're going to just have to stop and say that this is your essay. And that's okay. I know that it can be, I'm always one of those people that was like editing things to the last second in like high school and college, submitting papers. You don't need to feel like you need to do that. Your Common App essay is going to reach a point where you've done your best job. You've asked a trusted family member or a counselor for feedback, and you've edited it, and it's done. And that's exciting. It's scary, but know that that's a absolutely critical part of the process.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It can be done weeks or months before you submit it on the Common App. It does not have to be sort of a work in progress forever. And I'm so guilty of that.
I do want to touch on one thing that you mentioned very quickly. Timing and deadlines do matter here. So just some things to keep in mind kind of as we wrap this up. We see that there are questions here. So we do want to get to some of those last things and then also these questions. Common App like broke on November 1st last year, which is our early action and early decision one deadline. It was like down for a period of time. And so doing this work on putting together an essay, doing the brainstorming, the drafts, the edits, it's important to do now because timing wise, I think the more that you can kind of prepare yourself to be ready, you're in a much better place to be submitting your application, in the middle of October, for example, by the middle of October versus waiting until October 31st at the very last minute to try to submit. Because Common App has had some technical issues, we just a word of caution. No, that's not to say that's going to happen every year, but it did happen last year and there were some panicked phone calls. So keep that in mind, that the more that you can do ahead of time, the better off you're going to be in terms of the timing and pacing and feeling less stressed about it. Okay. There's a question about using your school sign in, like your school email address to access Common App. I would use whatever email you check most frequently. And maybe this is a reason to like start a different email that's not a school email. It's not a personal email. It's one that you could shut down eventually. Sometimes with school emails, it gets tricky because it's getting lost in the shuffle of all the other school things. But sometimes students use personal email addresses and they get so much college stuff that things get lost in the shuffle. Just a word of caution to you all. A lot of the important stuff that we're going to send you is via email. And so however you keep yourselves organized and on track, that's the email that I would use to access all of this stuff. Okay, last slide just has like a couple of things on it. So while you flip to that, I will get to these questions. I mentioned we require one letter of recommendation. We will accept more letters to the person that asked that. Keep in mind, after 2 or 3 letters, that if you are a consistent, good student, the information starts to sound pretty similar from letter to letter. So in my opinion, you don't need a second letter. You can certainly submit one, but just keep in mind that, like, for us, think of it like a third-party endorsement, right? The stuff you give us is the most important. And this letter, the goal is that it just verifies everything else that we've already seen in your supplemental essay, in your main essay, your activity list, that kind of thing. So letters, typically we encourage students to get academic core classes for teachers if they're going to get a teacher. If it's not from a core teacher, I would just be cautious about who you're asking. If it aligns with your major and that's why you want to ask them, or you feel like you have a good relationship, that's okay. But like coaches don't always have the best, like big, broad perspective that we need in terms of an academic understanding of your capacity to succeed at PC. Okay. Sarah, we've got a question. We've been talking about deadlines and timing. How soon should I have my essay finished?
That is a great question. It is going to vary, I think, student to student. If you're, say, a fall varsity athlete, I'd start writing it soon. Get that, get some of that taken away before what you know is going to be a busy season in your life, right? If you have more flexibility in your timing, I think what Megan said earlier about that Common App mishap last year is definitely true. I would very much recommend that you try to submit your applications a couple of days before the deadline, just to avoid any technical glitches, and also for your own peace of mind, just to know that it's in and it's in on time. When it comes to writing the essay, I always recommend students do some of these initial brainstorming and drafts in August and early September, and really kind of like finalize and polish in later September, early October, so that by mid-October, you are at a place that you're really happy with. But of course, that timeline looks very different for every student. I'm sure there are students on this call that have what they consider to be a final draft of their essay. I'm also sure there are students on this call that haven't thought about their essay yet, and this is the first step. Know that those are all absolutely valid places to be in right now. I would say the most important thing is to not be writing this essay on October 31st. Carve out some time to work through it over the next 2 months.
I love that. So smart. Okay. Couple of random things, and I feel like we can stop sharing. This is the advice. We're good to go. Okay. So because these questions get a little bit like off topic. So writing about your supplemental essay, the question is asking about like awards that you've received. There's actually a section in Common App where you can share awards. You can certainly put awards in the activity list if it's tied to an activity, a sport, something that you've done in school that you want to kind of combine all of that. There's certainly space for that. There is that awards section. That's actually where I would leave those, unless you feel like it feels relevant to what you're writing about. I don't know if you need to include it. Okay, question about letters. We're coming back to the letters again. We require one letter. Is a counselor, a guidance counselor, a school counselor, a good person to ask? Sure, that can be your letter. It could be a teacher. We just want to get a sense of who you are from that third party. So that's really up to you. There's no right or wrong answers here, but there is then a follow-up question, Sarah, about like letters of recommendation from outside of academics. And I don't know what this person is specifically referencing.
Yeah, so I'd say outside the academic world, if we're thinking things like coaches or maybe a theater director, something in that vein, again, they won't be as familiar with your academics, but they may be familiar with other pieces of you. It should not be, it cannot be your only recommendation, but if you do feel like you want to include it so we get a little bit more perspective, it's great. I've read some phenomenal, letters from theater directors and musical coaches, things like that. Particularly, maybe if you're applying for a theater program, that could be nice. I would stay, I don't know if this is like a correct thing to say on this. I would strongly second guess coaches, generally speaking, if only because we'll get a lot of information about your athletics through your activity list. We'll know what you play and how long you played it, if you're a captain, all of that. And so unless they are very familiar with your academics, I would generally steer away from them.
Okay, so a couple of quick final pieces of advice. Thanks for sticking with us. The application is open now, so you're ready and able to like go in and start working on all of the different components of the application. In terms of the essay, obviously we are here for you. So if you have questions about it or want to talk to us about it, please feel free to get in touch. Like I said, Sarah and I can answer those questions. We can also get you in touch with the people on staff that work with your respective areas. Know that it is okay then to ask some of these follow-up questions that you're asking us to other schools too. There's one in here. These are the last two that we will answer, but Activities, there's only 10 spaces. If you want to like merge things like things together, that's fine. We are also okay if you submit a resume. If you've built that and want to submit something, you can certainly do that too. We don't necessarily need more than that. Like you don't have to build a resume, but that is going to be an option. And like we said, letters that can really speak to your abilities to be successful at PC. That's really the goal of the application here, is to get an understanding of who you are and how, as Sarah mentioned, you'll be a part of the community at PC. That's really what we are trying to discern. So as you move through the next few weeks into the next few months, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are happy to help answer questions. We're obviously going to be visiting some of your schools, doing some college fairs, but we are always accessible via email, phone call. If you want to come visit campus, our fall dates will be ready at some point in the near future. We will also have some additional opportunities for some different kinds of visits. So please make sure that you're kind of staying in touch with us, checking the website, staying in touch with your admission counselor as we navigate this time. But we want you to have fun and enjoy this. I know that it can be stressful, but know you've got plenty of resources and people that you can come to that can help you as you think about these components of the application and how to kind of put it all together. Sarah, I don't know if you have any like last pieces of advice.
Yeah, I think just for some perspective, this is obviously a really important thing that you will be doing over the next couple months. And applying to college is stressful and it's big. It's the first time you've been doing it, right? Your first time going to college. That being said, if you ask me right now what I wrote my college essay on, I can't tell you. I don't know. I've forgotten. And so this is a phase. It's a time of your life. Put the work in, do your best, but know that like at the end of the day, it is going to be okay and things will work out. I know we like really brushed through this on our tips, but it is kind of rarely the thing that is a make or break on an application. So it is an important piece. We are going to read it, but it's not the piece. It's not the only thing that matters. And so I kind of want to make sure that you walk away from this feeling like you have more information, but not more stress. The essay is important, but it's not everything. And it certainly isn't the end all be all.
I think that's a really, really great way to end. Like it does matter. It is important, but be authentic, be yourself, know that you have a good story in you to tell. And we are so excited to read it when your application pops up in our queue. So stay in touch. Let us know if you need anything. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks for sticking with us. We're a little past 7, or 8 o'clock for those East Coasters. Enjoy your evening, everybody. And we will look forward to reading all of your essays when they come through this fall. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.